And now, here's Mike Muse with the political news.
So let's get right to it and meet the candidates.
That completes the opening statement.
We're going to get right to it.
On Sway in the Morning.
All right. Mike Muse is here, man.
Yo.
On these parts, they call them flip-flop, Heather B.
Wow,
Yeah,
man.
know,
Tough crowd, homie. Tough crowd, dude. You know I love you, man. You my brother, homie.
Nah, it's all good. Man, you love everybody.
Oh, no.
All right.
You're my boy, Blue.
Mike, I saved the Supreme Court justice story yesterday because I knew you were coming in today.
Okay.
And I know you wanted to do it further down the line. But let's just cap that off real quick and then get into NATO.
Okay, cool.
All right, cool. You go with
nothing,
that?
Nothing wrong with the audible, bro.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the
you know
audible,
I'm
bro.
doing it too.
I can handle that. I can handle
Okay,
that.
flip-flop.
Yeah.
All right, so
Damn, he pulled the game on you.
Man. Tracy, don't let me forget to talk about Ethiopia.
Yup, I got
All right, so so citizens, as you know, the Supreme Court nomination was revealed on Monday evening in the White House from President Trump. President Trump has selected Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh is from D.C. He is currently on the D.C. circuit. And Brett Kavanaugh was appointed by George W. Bush in 2006. Brett Kavanaugh also helped serve on President Bush's campaign during the 2000 year. And then he was appointed as President Bush's staff secretary. And then he went on to become the D.C. circuit. Citizens, Brett Kavanaugh comes from the Federalist Society. And the Federalist Society is a very conservative group that really goes around looking at different judges from a Republican conservative perspective. The Federalist Society, the founder and director of it, his main goal for the last 20 years has been able to create a Republican conservative court, if you will. And the Federalist Society has had some success with it. Not only just within the Supreme Court, as we're seeing with Gorsuch. He was part of that Federal Society, but also too when it came down to just the lower court system too as well. The conservatives believe that they didn't have the good progressive agenda, but they felt they could fight the progressive agenda in the circuit and the judiciary system. So one would say that he is a hardcore conservative. This is his viewpoint. This is where he stands. Some conservatives, though, believe that can they trust him?
Why do they mean by that?
Great question, because sometimes, normally what's happening in the course of a Supreme Court is that the presidents, you will hear the citizens in 2020 and in any other presidential cycle, even in 2016, 2012, 2000, you always ask the presidential candidate, will you perform a litmus test for the judge? And that essentially means, will you nominate someone based upon their views and how you believe they will make decisions on the court and how they will set law? Normally, they try not to ask those type of questions because they want it to be unbiased, right? They don't want it to come from a perspective of excuse me, sorry about that, citizens. You don't want to come from the perspective of putting someone on the court where you know that can be swayed, because the court and the judicial system was supposed to be independent of everything.
Okay.
There's been some surprises as of lately with some other Supreme Court justices that have got onto the court. They thought that they will always rule conservative, or they thought they will always rule in the progressive stance, and they haven't. And they really believe that Kavanaugh has that potential to be one of those. Some of the conservatives believe that.
That he could be swayed.
That it can be swayed. Because citizens, as you know, the one who's replacing is Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy has always been the swing vote. Justice Kennedy has been the one that has sided with Obamacare, right? But Kennedy was appointed by a Republican president. And so they kind of have concerns about that. From the Republican standpoint of view, from the Republican side of it, from the Democratic side, the Democratic point of view of it, their concern is that he may be too conservative and too partisan in order to even be fair, right? Yeah. And their big concern that they're concerned about with is in 2009, Kavanaugh wrote a opinion in the Minnesota Law Review that states that, quote, even the lesser burdens of criminal investigation, including preparing for questioning by criminal investigators, are time-consuming and distracting. Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people, and a president who is concerned about ongoing criminal investigations is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president. So citizens, what that means is that he believes that a sitting president should not be under investigation. He believes a sitting president should not be sit under and be deposed for a deposition. He believes that there should not be burdened with that. And so what does that mean, citizens? That means in the backdrop of these Russia investigation, was in the backdrop of the Mueller investigation, it goes to the question, because it's not settled law yet with the Supreme Court. We've always known that whatever Mueller comes out with, this is going to have to go to the Supreme Court. So what we're believing is that there was a litmus test that I just spoke about that President Trump possibly could have asked to figure out, how would Judge Kavanaugh view this position if it was to get to the Supreme Court based upon the Mueller investigation. And this opinion piece right here kind of states that. So the Democrats are going to have to fight for that in that perspective.
So they feel like he nominated a ringer.
Exactly.
Yeah, that could protect him in case this investigation amounts to something.
Exactly. And so what now we have to be on the lookout for now politically is how are the votes going to line. And there's three main senators to be on the lookout for. Murkowski, who's Republican in Alaska, and Senator Collins, who's a Republican from Maine, and also Senator Manchin, who's a Democrat sway, but he's a Democrat in a red Republican state.
Okay.
So those could be the swing votes on whether or not this judge gets confirmed to the Supreme Court or not. Murkowski and Collins' viewpoint is they believe Roe versus Wade is settled law. They believe in Roe versus Wade, citizens is abortion. They believe that's already settled law, but their concern is that because a Federalist society does not believe it is settled law, and that the states should be able to determine whether or not a female should have reproductive rights and choose what she wants to do with her reproductive rights. That is at stake, if you will. And so that matters to Collins, that matters to Murkowski. They believe that it is settled law. And so that is something to be on the lookout for as well. And then with Manchin, the question for Democrats are going to need to ask is, do they allow Manchin to go forward with this vote, right? Because Kavanaugh wasn't one of the controversial votes. He wasn't one of the more controversial judges, if you will, from what Trump could have picked, to which the Democrats could have rallied around. He is all for all reality of it, he's a safe conservative pick, with the exception of his opinion that he released about should a sitting president be sent to court or not. So that is a concern. Do the Democrats risk fighting this, and then in turn Manchin loses, and then the Democrats don't have a chance to win the Senate? But it seems like the Republicans have the votes, and the Republicans are really pleased with this election.
We got James on the line from California. What up, James? How you doing? It's Big James, y'all. Hey, Jay on the line.
What up, James?
Hey, I'm actually here just to say how much I appreciate the news reporting on this channel. I think that you have exceeded the bias of major news outlets in this country at the moment. And I think the reporting is just really informative, and I now rely on it every day, where I might have been listening to another channel, and I just don't feel like they're doing as good a job. I feel like the way you present the information is just really respectful to the audience, to the citizens, and you're doing a great service with this. So props to everyone, props to Mike Muse and the whole Sway team.
Wow, man. Hey, James, thank you, man. We appreciate that. That's been our intent all the time with the, especially with news. I mean, real journalism, you're going to give all sides of the story. And then for you guys, the citizens, to determine where you want to go from there. We're going to come back.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there you go, Mike. Was you not going to thank James? All right, we're going to come back and talk about NATO up next. Sway in the morning. Little chill, Rob G. Court is now in session. Flavor unit.
Jersey City.
Mark the 45 King. Yo, what up, Rob G? Anybody know him, text him.
Never feeling significant. I can make a difference. You need an example. Use this section.
Now more of the daily news on Sway in the Morning.
All right. Mike Muse is here. Mike, let's move into NATO and what's going on, because I know Trump and President Trump made a big statement about Germany being held captive by Russia.
Yes.
All right. And he talked about NATO.
Yes, he did, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, man, NATO is back in the story again. For those not familiar with what NATO stands for, it stands for the North Atlantic Trade Organization. It has 29 member countries that's been involved. NATO has been in place since World War II. It was put in position, citizens, to really add stability in Europe, really add stability to hold back Russia's impact in Europe that it was having, and to also to tamp down Germany. But what's interesting about that, citizens, is that NATO also is a collective bargaining to essentially when one country is in trouble and when one country is under attack, they all are under attack. And that is the heartbeat of it. It's called Article 5 of the founding documents. And it says, quote, an armed attack against one NATO member shall be considered an attack against them all. With that, too, citizens, is that NATO was also for trade, right? So after World War II, America noticed that we needed more trading partners.
Yeah.
And we noticed that if we didn't have this assemblage of these countries over in Europe, the danger could be that they will begin to create economic gains without us. And so we'll be in the outskirts of it. So essentially, NATO was a kind of the foundation and the architecture of the great trading partnership that we have that mounts over $19 trillion that benefits with our economy.
Okay.
So it's more than just defense. It's more than that. It really goes to economics, it goes to military, and it goes to financial stability.
How many allies are in NATO?
So it's 29 member countries.
29 members, okay.
Yeah, total countries.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that, though, Sway, is that Russia does not want NATO intact. The goal of Russia is to really, and it's always been, and it's been this issue prior to Donald Trump. The whole issue was to undermine NATO because NATO is what is preventing Russia from going even further. Think back to Ukraine. Think about the annex of Crimea, right? That's when we started getting involved with that. Russia can only go so far because they know there is a thing called NATO. And what's also an interesting, Sway, about this for the citizens who may not be realizing that is that NATO came to our rescue in 9/11. And so what we're seeing from President Trump during that, when he was a candidate Trump, he said that he believed NATO was obsolete. He since then changed his position as become president and now has asserted his biggest grievance with NATO. And this is a fact. What he says is that NATO isn't spending enough in the defense aspect of it. The goal of NATO is that for all the countries to spend 2% of their GDP. Currently, the United States is the biggest contributor to NATO, where all the other member countries are hovering around 1%, 1 to 1.5. So that's what he's upset about.
He has a point.
He has a point on the defense, but with some of the other European countries that says that, but we offset that in other areas. We offset that by having our troops aligned with you in Afghanistan. We also align with you when it comes to allowing your military bases to be in Europe. So your staging areas as you fight the Middle East. But it all came ahead this morning, Sway, right before I came in. President Trump was having breakfast with the Secretary General of NATO, and he's already starting off with some strong commentary. And here's what he had to say.
But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened.
And who was he addressing right there?
So that particular comment was addressed to the Secretary General of NATO, but also specifically to Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany, who's also become a vulnerable chancellor in Germany and has become the subject of President Trump's attack in terms of how he feels about Germany. The thing about Germany, though, is Germany is one of the strongest partners that we have over in Europe. They are one of the most stable economies over in Europe. And so to begin to undermine and to attack Angela Merkel is really undermining one of our strongest allies that we have to that. And then he made some other really aggressive commentaries, if you will, from a breakfast that was supposed to be just pretty much a Photoshop, but it became very contentious between him and the Secretary General of of NATO. But here is what the President of the European Union had to say about it, and this really, citizens, begins to understand the frustration that our European allies are having with President Trump.
Europe was first to respond on a large scale when the US was attacked and called for solidarity after 9/11. European soldiers have been fighting shoulder to shoulder with American soldiers in Afghanistan. 870 brave European men and women sacrificed their lives, including 40 soldiers from my homeland, Poland. It is always worth knowing who is your strategic friend and who is your strategic problem.
So that is the European Union president really outlining what Europe has been to the United States and the ally that he has been. What you didn't hear him talking about in that piece is he goes on further to gives more commentary. We all know President Trump is going to be meeting with Putin on Friday, which really makes this NATO summit so important in terms of how does he handle relationships with his NATO members, knowing that Russia wants to undermine NATO, knowing that he's going into a conversation with Russia on Friday. So what this president was saying is that you, as your allies are fleeing from the United States, essentially, you need President Trump to begin to recognize who is your ally and strategic partner versus who's your strategic problem, which is Russia. If you think about it, Sway, President Trump has went after Canada. He is now going after Germany. He's now going after the United Kingdom. He's now going after France. And he's now going after the entire NATO. So when you think about that, who are our allies now in the sense of who does he consider our allies? As he's removed us from a Paris Climate Agreement, as he's removed us from TPP, he's signaling strong signals. This is his diplomacy. We didn't really know what his diplomacy strategy was going to be.
Yeah.
So the question is, are we even moving from an America First strategy, which we thought when he came in, to America only, right? And then where does that position us going forward? We still haven't heard a response from Angela Merkel or from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. So citizens, this is going to be something to really watch this space. But really, citizens, begin to understand that this is so much bigger than just NATO and defense, but really it's about trade. It's about being our partner. It's about establishing our partnership that we had going forward. In particular, as President Trump has issued new tariffs against China. So something to pay attention to, citizens.
Man. Yeah. What is our hope? We don't. You can't even answer that. Going into this meeting with Putin, like, what is it? What are some questions that people are saying need to be answered?
So great question. So the one main question that President Trump wants answers from, and he really wants NATO to increase their spend to 2% GDP. So that is what he wants the outcome to be. And he's correct with that they are not spending. So Germany has committed to raising it up to 1.5% by 2025. When it comes to Russia, it's essentially like a reset with Russia. He believes that we should be talking to all foreign leaders. And most people agree with that, that there should be communication with leaders. The difficulty is the terms in which he's meeting with President Putin by himself in the backdrop of this Russia investigation, the backdrop of Russian meddling within our 2016 election. It just goes to the question of why now, and in particular, why are you so strongly against NATO, knowing that's what Putin wants? So that's where we are.
All right. In closing, you wanted to talk about Ethiopia, the big headline that's floating around the globe right now.
Yeah, man. We don't get a chance to really talk about Africa a lot, the continent, and we really in particular don't get a chance to talk about East Africa. And so, citizens, just a note, just some really positive news globally from global diplomacy perspective is that Ethiopia and Eritrea has been at war essentially for 20 years. They have now ceased that war. They are now going to come together. They're going to open up their trade partnerships. They're going to open up trade agreements. They're already going to start airline flights to go back and forth between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And so it's just going to be just a really great things for the citizens and for the country. Lots of lives have been lost as a result of this conflict. And so I'm really excited for what's happening right now with Ethiopia, for those two countries to come together. So cheers to you, Ethiopia and Eritrea. And also, too, now it allows Ethiopia to have a port at sea because they're landlocked. So now it helps impact their economy, too, as well. And citizens, to tune in for more, man, tune into the Mike Muse Show later on today from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on channel 121, the Insight Channel. I'm actually going to do more of a deep dive into global diplomacy, soft diplomacy, exactly what I've been outlining right now with NATO, but I'm going to do it through the lens of food and fast casual.
Thank you, Mike Muse. Hit him up. You want to continue this conversation, hit him directly?
At I am Mike Muse, M-U-S-S-M-E on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, we got sports up next.
Yeah, man, and a recap on Cap as well, Sway, right?
That's right. Sway in the morning.
Africa.